Good morning. Welcome to Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship on this beautiful Sunday morning after a not so beautiful Saturday. And we're very glad to welcome you here this morning. I'm Steve Runyon. I'm your worship associate this morning. And thank you, Michael Rosen, our music director, for our wonderful prelude music. And now I am going to hand it over to Reverend Joel on Zoom for the call to worship.
He's not live.
Oh, he's not. Oh. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Reverend Joel Miller, minister of Morristown Unitarian Universalist. Reverend Joel Miller, interim minister of Morristown Unitarian. I'm the Reverend Joel Miller, here, the interim minister of the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So sorry not to be with you this morning, since apparently I have COVID and I really don't want to share it with you. These opening words are by the Unitarian Universalist and scientist Jeffrey Lockwood. We are all visitors. Our time is ultimately limited. We're all just passing through. How might we act if we consider ourselves guests in the lives of our friends, of our families? A good guest allows the other to be a good host, and a good guest should express genuine gratitude. We might think of ourselves as uninvited guests in this earth, but not unwelcome guests. And I think the rules for being a good guest, a guest of the world, are the same. Ask little, accept what is offered, and give thanks. Good morning.
We have lots of announcements today, so hold on to your hats. I'm going to fly through them. First and possibly most important, although I don't want to minimize any others, is the service auction. The kickoff party is going to be Saturday, November 4th at 5 p.m. So I hope you're all looking forward to that and will be able to participate. I'm sorry to say that I will be out of town, so I'm sorry to miss that. Rita Morris will be in the Great Hall during the coffee hour, signing folks up for Meals with UU Friends, which is a great opportunity to get together with other UUs and meet some of the people that maybe you don't know so well in the congregation here. Tomorrow morning, Nick is going to be hosting a morning mindfulness meditation, and you are definitely welcome to join him in that and relax and breathe deeply. I'm going to invite Nan Perigo to come up and talk about the Ministerial Search Committee's latest news and requests.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everybody. Hi. How many of you have had a chance to go to a cottage meeting so far? Yeah. How many of you are signed up and haven't gone yet? Getting there. We have a little over 2 more weeks worth of cottage meetings. There are people that are opening their houses to us. For instance, I'm hosting a week from this coming Saturday, so if you want to come see my house and see how I host a party, you're welcome to come. We have a cottage meeting after the service today in the dining room. This will be the last one at Muff because of other activities going on after services. So if you want to do one at Muff, come see us in the dining room. I have cookies and juice. And one more thing, if you haven't had a chance, we have a workshop coming up in November 11th. It's the week after service auction. We'll be having a Breaking Barriers, Building Beliefs workshop from 9 to 12 in the morning. And it is a way of opening our minds and our hearts to having not the standard minister or not the standard people in our staff. So they have us look at our current beliefs and help us open our minds. So come to a cottage meeting, sign up for the ministerial sign up at msc@muff.org. Thank you. I hope to see you at a cottage meeting soon.
Thank you, Nan. Next Sunday, there's going to be a special presentation of the Odyssey Project. It's going to feature Judy Deutsch. Some of you may know her. I don't know. I don't know her. She's Reverend Judy Deutsch. She's one of the first members here at Muff, and she's going to be talking about the beginnings of the fellowship here, including the decision to buy this building. And she'll be available on Zoom after the presentation, the taped presentation. She'll be available on Zoom for questions. So you can, if you haven't seen her in a while, you can get to catch up with her a little bit and ask her whatever questions you have. And then the Sunday after, the 22nd, at noon, there's going to be a class, Getting to Know UU class, which potential members, new members, long-time members are invited to attend to dive deeper into what it means to be a UU and what Unitarian Universalism is. And later that afternoon at 3 p.m., there's going to be a game day, and you're invited to follow the link in the e-blast or contact Rita Morris or Carol Johnson. And for any additional announcements, please see online. And Nick, I think you had one announcement. Yeah.
Just real quick, not to keep you guys here too much longer, but as we move into RA this year, we have asked our kids to be present in the service with us for many reasons, most of which it teaches them how best to be together in community with all of you all. That does mean there's going to be a little bit of extra noise and wiggling in the back, and we welcome that as part of our beloved community here. But I also acknowledge, for you kids, that it's also sometimes hard to listen to these adults like myself drone on. So, we have some activity bags in the back. I also am starting this week little bingo boards during the sermon. So, when Reverend Joel gives his sermon, there are some words and phrases on here that he uses quite a bit. Things like chalice or covenant or working in Buffalo or Rochester or being a jeweler, right? And you mark them off. If you are a kid and you got one of these and you get a bingo or close to a bingo, I'm not really grading here. I have some prizes for you out in the back. But that requires you to pay attention to Reverend Joel. And the more we pay attention to participate, sing with the songs and stuff, the better the whole service goes for everybody. Okay? There we go. So come and see me if you need.
Thanks, Nick. And I realized since Joel is remote today, he was texting me some announcements before. So you'll see that the UUA Disaster Relief Fund is really very low right now because of all the weather-related disasters that they've been dealing with. So that's who we're sharing the offering today with. So please give as generously as you can. Actually, okay, I'm caught up. All right. So now we'll have our chalice lighting, and we will read together. Love is the spirit of His fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now we have our first song, and it's an ancient Navajo prayer. You are invited to stand as you are able and want to.
The selections today are in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day tomorrow. So the first two, this is a traditional Navajo prayer, it's in the Teal Book, and then later on the Native American melody, which I will play. There's no music on the screen for that, which is really in the spirit, because remember, notating things is very much a Western tradition. So to truly sing and not appropriate is to chant without looking at the music, and just, even me playing the piano, I'll give a drone, but I'll play the whole melody through once, and then we'll go back to it. This is for 196, the later one, Singer of Life. For now, Ancient Mother, which is a notated chant here in the book.
Every Sunday, we include in our Sunday worship service a time to share and acknowledge significant life events, births, graduations, deaths, and other significant life accomplishments, losses, and changes. Not all the milestones or passages we have experienced will be shared aloud this morning, but we remember in this moment that we need not be alone. It is possible, even essential, that we share our lives with others. It is in our deepest sharing that we will all also find our greatest strengths. I want to start the first milestone, the first milestone by wishing Reverend Joel better health soon. You saw in his call to worship, he's not so great right now. We have another milestone. Daryl Courtley has spine surgery scheduled for this Friday, October 13th at 2 p.m. at Morristown Medical. Following that will be 2 to 3 days in the hospital before rehab. Then it will be 3 months of no lifting, twisting, or bending as the bone graft takes hold, and several more months of further recovery. Please keep Daryl and Mary in thoughts of healing and well-being this Friday and in these coming months. Are there any other milestones, passages, announcements anybody wants to raise?
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
My mom was a member of this fellowship from 1963, maybe until she died in 2001, and I just had my 50th high school reunion last night, so I'm here. That's Larison or Lawrenson, depending on when you knew. And I'm Jeannie. So the last time I was in this room was my mom's memorial service. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming this morning, especially after a late night, catching up with everybody.
11 o'clock, we're like...
Okay, now we have our meditation, and I invite you to join in a moment of meditation. This morning it comes from the book Braiding Sweetgrass by the scientist and Potawatomi Indian professor Robin Wall Kimmerer. Cultures of gratitude must also be cultures of reciprocity. Each person, human or no, is bound to every other in a reciprocal relationship. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to feed me, I am in turn bound to support its life. If I receive a stream's gift of pure water, then I am responsible for returning a gift in kind. An integral part of a human's education is to know those duties and how to perform them. May we practice this loving kindness in our commitment to care for all life on our earth. Amen. Blessed be. Our next song is Singer of Life. Please stand as you're willing and able.
You skipped the temporary.
I apologize. Okay. It's in one place and not the other.
Ask if the children I'm sorry, not with you today, to ask if the children, youth, young at heart in the congregation would like to come up and help me tell the story. We'll just have to do it together with me in my apartment. This is a story this morning about a samurai who was looking for wisdom, and he wanted to know the difference between heaven and hell. So he went to a Zen master, a Zen Roshi, to ask the Zen master, what is the difference between, how do you know what's heaven? How do you know what is hell? So when the samurai warrior came, dressed in his samurai outfit, had his sword, came to the Zen master. He said, Zen master, respectfully, I would like to know, what is the difference between heaven and hell? The Zen master looked at the samurai and said, what makes you think I want to talk with you? Look at you. Your sword isn't sharp. You're a mess. The samurai was deeply offended, and being a samurai, he pulled his sword out to kill the Zen master for insulting him. The Zen master looked up at the samurai peacefully, because the Zen master was sitting, as he often did when he was meditating, and he looked up at the samurai and said, that, my friend, is hell. And the samurai took a breath and realized what he had just learned. Because he was a samurai, he cut his finger just a tad on the blade because they had to do that. And then he put the sword back. And having put the sword back, the Zen master looked at the samurai and said, "And that, my friend, is heaven."
All right, everyone, I'm going to play this melody through once, the whole thing. It's 2 verses. And you can either sing the melody on the notes I play or just hum on the tonic. That's this note. You're welcome to stand, sit with your eyes closed and just sing on that. And you'll hear that all the words and the melody go over that note. So you can go... Yes. Singer of lovers are songs with petals to you. Singer of life, you color the year, dazzling the eyes with birds red and bright. Joy is for us, the flowers are spread. Singing is our delight. Mortal are we, all living things, with eagles in the even the golden chain will not last. Singing alone, I know cannot die. Here in this house, time we sow songs that like birds. Good. Let's do the whole thing from the top. First verse. Sing, for flowers are songs with petals to your Sing of life, dazzling the eye with birds red and bright. Joy is for us, the flowers are spread. Singing is our delight. Mortal are we, with all living things, with eagles in the sky. Even with gold and jade will not last. Hanging alone, no cannot die. Here in this house, the springtime we sow songs that like birds can cry.
Now is the time for, sorry, the reading, I keep skipping stuff. Sorry about that. The reading is by Reverend Joel.
The reading this morning is from the poet Mary Oliver, and the title of the poem is The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper. I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down into the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Okay, now is the time for our offertory. And as already mentioned, this, did I skip something again? Okay. Come on up. Okay. As already mentioned, today will help replenish the coffers of the UU Disaster Relief Fund. So please give as you are able. Thank you. for that beautiful offertory. Reverend Joel will now present the sermon. I'm not sure if it's pre-recorded. Is this Zoom? This is Zoom. Okay, so not Zoom. All pre-recorded. Okay.
In a service last March, I shared some of the insights from a book by the Native American scientist Robin Wall Kimmerer. Professor Kimmerer is both very much a scientist and very much a Potawatomi Indian. And being a Potawatomi Indian, this means she has conversations with animals and plants. And there are a lot of scientists who consider this completely unacceptable behavior for a scientist. I found myself pretty open to Dr. Kimmerer's respect for the other beings on this earth. I've had some insights because of the learnings both of indigenous peoples and their cultures, but also because of some Unitarian Universalists. For example, there's the book by the Unitarian Universalist scientist Jeffrey Lockwood. It's a book he wrote called Grasshopper Dreaming. Jeffrey Lockwood is a Unitarian Universalist, also a scientist. And in his book, Grasshopper Dreaming, Professor Lockwood describes his work as an entomologist. An entomologist is a scientist who studies insects. And Professor Lockwood specializes in grasshoppers, especially the ones that live in the prairies of Wyoming. And it's important to understand that Jeffrey Lockwood's science, his work, is funded by companies that want him to figure out how best to kill grasshoppers using insecticide. Even as Professor Lockwood studies how to kill grasshoppers, he also loves grasshoppers. He designs pesticides, and yet he has a love for grasshoppers. It's kind of confusing, and yet he's both a scientist and, well, he has conversations with grasshoppers. Grasshoppers are a big problem for farmers. In fact, grasshoppers and locusts and other creatures like this have been a problem for human beings throughout all of our history. Grasshoppers and locusts can swarm every once in a while, and in such numbers that they'll eat all of the crops, all of the food, everywhere. And people will die of starvation because the grasshoppers have eaten everything. There are ancient Bible stories about swarms of locusts eating all the food, and there are newer stories from the American West where prairie settlers have gone out, have begun farming, and suddenly there are swarms of grasshoppers eating everything they've grown and bankrupting them. Farmers want to survive, so they don't like grasshoppers. Professor Lockwood did science that tested poisons to best kill grasshoppers. Now, the thing is, grasshoppers, most of the time they aren't a problem, but every 10 years or so, there's suddenly these huge swarms of grasshoppers. There will be millions, billions of grasshoppers that will appear like a huge storm cloud, descend on a field, and they will devour everything. Everything that's a plant that can be eaten, they'll eat it. A grasshopper swarm can bankrupt an American farmer in a year or two. Throughout human histories, these kinds of swarms, these giant clouds of grasshoppers or locusts would devour so much of what human beings were farming that entire countries could die of starvation. With science, we human beings figured out how to poison grasshoppers to protect our crops. But the grasshoppers learned to adapt and resist the poison. The poisons worked less well, so we had to use more poison. And the more poison the farmers sprayed onto their crops, the more the grasshoppers learned to resist the poison, And we got stuck in a cycle where we would spray more and more poisons, and the grasshoppers would learn to resist more and more. And soon we were putting so much poison on our crops that the food we were eating was becoming poison even to us. So what Professor Lockwood did was good science. He literally spent years on the ground, crawling around. You could say his science was very well grounded. Because Professor Lockwood got to know the grasshoppers so well, he cared for them, he respected them. Jeffrey Lockwood can describe the beauty in each of the species of grasshoppers that he knows, and he knows them well. Lockwood saw we needed to find a way to live with the grasshoppers. We needed to figure out how to stop poisoning ourselves. And he realized we could negotiate with them. Maybe even know something about their dreams. Thus the title of his book, Grasshopper Dreaming. He knew just fighting with them, trying to poison them to death, was not going to work. We were just hurting ourselves while they adapted. But in respecting the grasshoppers, their beauty, caring for them, respecting them, well, he learned a lot, but this was not considered good science. Other scientists were deeply offended that Jeffrey Lockwood cared about grasshoppers and was imagining himself negotiating with them. They said, Jeffrey Lockwood is not doing good science. So an example of this, when Lockwood researched grasshoppers, he discovered they often ate at night. So he wrote a paper on grasshoppers eating at night. This 30 years ago, when he wrote this paper, this was a heresy. It was a terrible thing for him to do as a scientist. I don't quite understand why researching grasshoppers eating at night was bad, but some scientists thought it was awful and terrible. Another scientist decided to write his own paper to refute, to prove that Professor Lockwood was doing bad science. So the professor wrote this paper, and he took grasshoppers, put them in little cages in his laboratory, and gave them food to eat in the dark. The grasshoppers rarely ate, and they died. And the scientist said, this is proof that Jeffrey Lockwood is doing bad science. Professor Lockwood answered his scientist colleague by pointing out first that his colleague had not replicated the conditions under which he had made his observations. That's a very scientific way of saying Jeffrey Lockwood was out in the field in the grass at night looking at the grasshoppers. He wasn't in a lab putting grasshoppers in tiny little cages. And then when Lockwood repeated his colleague's experiment and put grasshoppers into cages, he found it didn't matter whether it was light or dark. Once the grasshoppers were in cages, they just didn't eat, period. They all died. It turned out the scientist who was so angry at Jeffrey Lockwood was not doing very good science himself. This kind of thing happens often in science. A young scientist 40 years ago discovered something. He discovered a new kind of crystal. He called it a quasi-crystal. Quasi because it was not quite this crystal, not quite that crystal, not quite not a crystal. Quasi meaning sort of. Quasi-crystals. The scientist was, at the time, a young man named Dan Shechtman. He'd done very careful work as a scientist. He'd studied what looked like these quasi-crystals. He verified and re-verified his observations. He used all of his knowledge of chemistry, of physics, of math, even common sense. And then, even though all his friends said don't do it, and even though every scientist on Earth was telling him he was an idiot, he published his discovery of quasi-crystals. The university where Dan Shechtman worked was so angry at him, they fired him for publishing this paper. His paper, they said, on quasi-crystals brought disgrace on his team. Shechtman remembered that people just laughed at him. Linus Pauling was a scientist at the time, a 2-time winner of the Nobel Prize, and actually an active Unitarian Universalist. And Professor Pauling was so outraged by Dan Shechtman's scientific apostasy, that is, his heresy, his what Pauling considered as bad science, that he went on a crusade against Shechtman. He said, "There is no such thing as quasi-crystals. There are only quasi-scientists," like Dan Shechtman. Jeffrey Lockwood's science eventually earned respect and recognition because Professor Lockwood discovered creative ways to apply pesticides that reduced grasshoppers' damage to crops. He discovered that by spraying only a third of a field, he would kill just one part of the grasshopper population. And then the grasshoppers in the other 2/3 of the field would then go and eat their dead comrades and then ingest themselves the pesticide that had killed the first grasshoppers. And as these grasshoppers all spread out to go eat their comrades and then die, there were a few grasshoppers that remained, but they did so little damage that it wasn't a big problem for the farmers and their crops. This is an important scientific discovery. This discovery by Professor Lockwood reduced the use of pesticides by about 90%. That was a lot. Farmers and ranchers were delighted because their costs of farming went way down and their harvests stayed way up. They were good. Lockwood explains he made this discovery about grasshoppers because he learned to love them and respect them. He came to know them well. He had a feeling for how they lived, how they thought. He quite literally asked them about his work. And the grasshoppers, he writes, do not resent my work. They accept that birds, ants, humans, all will thin the numbers of grasshoppers. But, he says, tens of thousands of years of grasshopper wisdom demands our respect. They know how to adapt. They know how to survive with. We need to listen and respect what they know. Same thing with these quasi-crystals. Professor Shechtman actually won a Nobel Prize for, what else? Quasi-crystals, for discovering them. Today, those of us in our homes using non-stick pans, all of our light bulbs that are made from LEDs, or medical instruments, or those amazing knives that cut and don't have to be sharpened. All of these things are made from quasi-crystals. It's interesting that Professor Shechtman is an atheist. He's also a deeply spiritual man. He's gone to extremes to praise even the colleagues who had him fired in the early 1980s. What Shechtman understands is that science is something we do in community, with peers, with friends. Science is done with other scientists. And every scientist has a teacher, and every scientist needs colleagues who can understand their work. Grasshoppers are clearly not speaking in English to Professor Lockwood, nor is Lockwood saying that they do. But Jeffrey Lockwood is a Unitarian Universalist, and this means that he sees the world with an open heart. He watches not just with his mind and his scientific thinking, but with a sense of love and respect for other life, other beings. He offers them a hospitality that he hopes for in return. It is truly a way to be a good guest in the world, along with the grasshoppers. Professor Linus Pauling made a terrible scientific mistake. Not that he was skeptical. Good science means you doubt things a lot. But Linus Pauling's mistake was actually more as a Unitarian Universalist. He was forgetting that even a scientist is still a guest in the world. A scientist is even still a guest in science itself. Pauling made a significant and very embarrassing error of science, but it was based on an ethic of how he treats other people. He forgot to be respectful and loving. Professor Pauling would be quite shocked to see his community of Unitarian Universalists accept that there is knowledge that cannot be captured by science alone. A great deal of what we know is also created by our being guests in the world and practicing loving kindness. This is what indigenous people like Professor Robin Wall Kimmerer are trying to explain to us. That as we are respectful of other beings on this world, we have to practice listening, and listening with love and care to each other. This is a love that listens. Ours is a love that gives thanks. It's complicated sometimes. And it's a knowledge that declares no one ever knows enough to be in charge of everything and to pass judgment on others. It is a parallel peer review process, like science, a peer review of healthy spirituality. We still have to verify what is truth. What is kind? What is not kind? What is respectful? What is not? We know the difference because true knowing does not put us in a state of war against the world around us, against other beings. Love, in its largest sense, is another way of seeing ourselves as a strand in the web of life. Love calls us to care for the web so that we care finally for our own selves.
Please stand if you're willing and able. You might want to.
Thank you, Michael and Tim. Now, before the benediction, you go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. Before the benediction, I realized that, in fact, I was not caught up in the announcements, and I had something that I needed to raise during the milestones, actually. So before I do the benediction, I just wanted to pass on a message from Reverend Betancourt, who's the president of the UUA. She says, I pray for the people of Israel and Palestine. I pray for leaders around the globe who must respond to this latest flare of violence and the untenable ethical considerations that abound. I pray for Muslim and Jewish UUs who experience the impact of this long strife acutely. I pray that those of us less likely to know the trauma of unending brutality and harm will not turn away from generational loss, from the devastating realities and their root causes, or from a relentless tragedy of war and occupation. Be gentle with yourselves when you need to be, but do not turn away unless you must. We are one global family living tenuously on the same human-impacted earth. Let us center ourselves in justice as we call for peace. Let it be so. No matter how weak or how frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected, each day act, so you may be a little more whole. Go in peace.
Thank you.